Good morning, everybody. Good morning. It's JPR, and welcome back to another video. While I was doing my reviewing every Pokemon Generation series, I received many requests from people asking me to discuss the Pokemon spin-off games once I had finished. Now, over the last 20 years, Pokemon spin-off games come in many forms and have had various lifespans. Pokemon Coliseum series lasted 2 years, Pokemon Ranger for 4 years, and Pokemon Masters for 15 minutes. But none were able to last quite as long as the beloved Pokemon Mystery Dungeon series, which released 4 games across 10 years, spanning from 2005 to 2015. Ever since Generation 3, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon has been a staple for Pokemon spin-offs, but as Gen 7 rapidly reaches its end, it's become quite apparent for the first time since its inception, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon won't be joining the party. Now, does that mean Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is officially dead? No, it may just be taking a nap in Chunsoft's basement somewhere. But it does beg the question, what happened to Pokemon Mystery Dungeon? Why has this series been eerily quiet for the last 4 years? Hopefully, by taking a look at the history of the Mystery Dungeon series, we might be able to answer that question. So, as I mentioned earlier, Pokemon Mystery Dungeon's first installment was released in 2005 as Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Red Rescue Team and Blue Rescue Team for the Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS respectively. The Nintendo DS was brand spanking new at the time, with a low base of players. It made sense to split the release on 2 different consoles. The game follows a pretty simple premise. You are a human who has been mysteriously transformed into a Pokemon and can understand Pokemon language. You then team up with a partner Pokemon of your choosing, forming a rescue team that goes on adventures to save other Pokemon, and eventually the world. Despite some mixed reviews from critics, it quickly became a smashing success with the general Pokemon audience, with both versions combining to sell eventually over 5 million copies worldwide, putting it just below Pokemon Stadium as the best-selling Pokemon spin-off game of all time. With 16 playable Pokemon and 39 dungeons that randomly generate new maps every time you enter, these games boasted great replayability over other Pokemon spin-off titles. They are also quite commonly praised for the rich characters and the overall story. Mystery Dungeon also became the first spin-off series to warrant its own full special animated Pokemon episode, known as Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Team Go-Getters Out the Gate. With such a critical success, it came as no surprise that 3 years later, sequels known as Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time, Explorers of Darkness would be released in the Nintendo DS, which we received in a very similar manner. Lukewarm reviews from critics, but absolutely adored by the fanbase, with many fans claiming that Explorers could even compete with, or even be better than the core series Pokemon games. Similar to the core series games, the Explorers duo would receive a third enhanced installment known as Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Sky. This enhanced version would feature some minor quality of life fixes, as well as the addition of a few new post-game dungeons and special episodes where you could play as and learn more about other prominent characters from the story, such as Guildmaster Wigglytuff, Grovyle, and yes, even God himself. Even though this game was once again panned by critics for being repetitive, it is overwhelmingly considered the definitive Pokemon Mystery Dungeon game by the general audience. Combined, all 3 versions would go on to sell 5.9 million copies, finally toppling Pokemon Stadium as the best-selling Pokemon spin-off game of all time, and would not just get 1, but 2 fully animated episodes. 3 extra Mystery Dungeon WiiWare games would also be released in 2009 using the same art style as Pokemon Rumble. However, these games didn't feature much of a story and were never released outside Japan, so there's not much to say about them. After the explosive success of Explorers of Sky, it looked as though Mystery Dungeon was set for life. But as Chunsoft would soon learn, once you've touched the sky, there's nowhere to go but down. Enter Pokemon Mystery Dungeon Gates to Infinity on the 3DS in late 2012. These games unveiled a brand new 3D look for the Mystery Dungeon series, but underneath that shiny new appearance, you wouldn't find much in comparison to the first couple entries. It can be immediately noticed that the personality test was scrapped in this game, with you just being able to pick your playable Pokemon and partner right away. Most fans would argue that the personality test was a vital part of the Mystery Dungeon series. It was quite fun to answer a list of random questions to see which Pokemon you were the most similar to, so Gates wasn't off to a hot start. And that's when you realize the number of playable Pokemon has also been reduced from 21 all the way down to 5. Pikachu, Snivy, Tepig, Oshawott, and Axew. And soon people would realize that there were less than 150 Pokemon total in the entire game when 649 Pokemon were in existence at this point. The lack of Pokemon and options was never publicly addressed, but we're left to assume that the transition to 3D must have eaten up a lot of development time. In addition to the lack of content, Gates was also criticized for reusing several plot points in the Explorers games and not having the infinite replayability as advertised. Go figure. Seriously, I have to wonder why this infinite dungeons gimmick was important enough to be used in the title of the game. Basically, you had to use the 3DS's camera to find round objects that would transform into magnet gates, leading you to an endless amount of short dungeons that you could explore with a randomly generated team Pokemon to get extra items and money. Which for me just ended with me pointing my 3DS at a roll of toilet paper more often than not. Yeah, it's not all what it's cracked up to be, and I'm not even sure if that description I gave you even slightly excited you. Now wait, I'm not here to kick Gates while it's down. For all it's worth, I still think this is a pretty decent Pokemon spin-off game, just not a good game in the Mystery Dungeon series. It's almost like the Last Jedi or something. The gameplay is still relatively enjoyable, and like all Mr. Dungeon games, it boasts a fantastic soundtrack, but if you're looking to get into the series, it might not be the best one to start with. Although this game didn't receive an animated episode like the previous 2 installments, it did still get a pretty well-made animated trailer similar to what was done for Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. But we haven't even gotten to the real kicker yet, and that's the Gates to Infinity only sold over 500,000 copies worldwide. That's a whopping 80% decrease from what the Explorers game sold. Numbers like that don't even place Gates in the top 50 best-selling 3DS games of all time, which is not a great sign for anything with the Pokemon logo on it. Maybe it's because it condensed from 3 different versions down to just 1, but still, even considering that, a massive chunk of their fanbase just went missing overnight. At this point, I think Spike Chunsoft saw the writing on the wall and determined that the Pokemon Mr. Dungeon series was simply not going to flourish like it used to. Pokemon Super Mr. Dungeon was eventually pushed out a few years later in 2015, this time featuring a personality quiz, a wide array of playable Pokemon, and the presence of all 721 existing Pokemon minus Volcanion. What was noticeably missing this time around, though, was an animated special of any kind. No episode, not even a trailer. Like I said, I'm pretty sure that Chunsoft intended for this to be one last big hurrah for the Mr. Dungeon series, just so it didn't have to go out on the sour note that was Gates to Infinity. It's definitely the most divisive of the Mr. Dungeon games among the fanbase, though. Some think it's as good as the first 2, while others see this as only being a tiny step above Gates. If you want my opinion, I personally really enjoyed Super Mr. Dungeon and would gladly recommend it to anybody who loves the series. It takes a few of the formulaic plot points of the Mr. Dungeon series and turns them on their head, which I really appreciate. Super Mr. Dungeon would eventually go on to sell about 1.2 million copies, which is more than double what Gates sold, but once again, it just couldn't come close to matching the first 2 installments. Ever since then, the Mr. Dungeon series has fell into a stubborn silence. This 4-year hiatus is the longest we've ever gone without a new Mr. Dungeon game, and it has many people wondering if Mr. Dungeon will ever return. As much as I love Mr. Dungeon, I'm not banking on its return anytime soon. Super was a satisfying conclusion to the series that featured many returning characters in old locations, and it just felt like the proper way to send off the series into the sunset. As disappointing as that may be for some, it's quite understandable why Spike Chunsoft wouldn't want to pour any more time and money into a series that hasn't been incredibly successful since 2009. Especially when mobile games like Pokemon Go and Pokemon Masters have proven they can make more money overnight than they'd ever dream of. It's sad to think about, but as a wise man once said, reality can often be disappointing.